Hello and a very warm welcome to this special web broadcast of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2013. My name is David Roth from WPP and it's my pleasure to guide you through today's web broadcast. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover. In this BrandZ Top 100 Insight broadcast, we will cover why the BrandZ valuation methodology beats all comers, an interview with Sir Martin Sorrell, the stories behind the ranking numbers, the Top 100 countdown, the great T-shirt giveaway, so get prepared to email. We'll look at what's happening in the BRICS, highlight the key takeaways for growing brand value. We reveal the new leader for the retail category, a special feature on Brazil as they prepare to host the biggest sporting events on the planet, and show you how to get all the BrandZ valuation data, insights and latest brand news online and on the move. And we'll give you a preview of a new BrandZ report on corporate reputation, the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2013. Well, I'm joined now by Peter Walsh, who's the Global Brand Director for BrandZ. Peter, a very warm welcome. Peter, we've made some changes to some of the category definitions and what lies within them for this year. Tell us what we've done and why.
Well, indeed, David. As you know, we've got 14 different categories, a wealth of material in this very comprehensive report. And to make it a little bit more accessible, we've placed them into 5 overall sectors: consumer, food and drink, financial institutions, technology and commodities. And within those, we have done some slight redefinitions in order to keep up with what's really happening out there in the real world. For example, retail, we've included some pharmacy retail brands and department stores. In luxury, where we used to have a whole mismatch of different luxury brands, we've been more focused and we looked at high-end accessories and watches. Soft drinks, very interesting. We talked to major soft drink manufacturers to see the way in which they were looking at the world, which is obviously comes from their consumers. And they are really thinking about share of throat of non-alcoholic drinks. So that means we are including for the first time coffee, tea, and also there's an interesting orange juice drink that comes into the rankings. The other major change, the last one, is financial institutions, where we've split banks into global banks and regional banks. Because again, it just makes much more sense to be able to understand the dynamics of what's happening in the financial marketplace that way.
Well, all of those definitions are included in the report, so you'll be able to look at the detail of what's included in each of those sectors. For the moment, Peter, thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm now joined by Robin Healy, who is the Vice President of Millward Brown Optimal and the person responsible for the rankings. Robin, a great pleasure to see you. We always have a lot of questions around the methodology of the brand rankings, but probably more importantly, how the BrandZ methodology compares to the Interbrand methodology and why it's superior. So what's the answer to that?
Yes, okay, David. So basically, the two methodologies at a very top line are very similar. It's actually the execution of the methodology that differentiates us from Interbrand. So brand value is calculated by taking the financial value of the brand, not of the company, but of the brand, and multiplying that by the brand contribution. And brand contribution is the amount or the proportion of the financial value that is attributable to the brand alone. Now, financial value, what we call that, they call economic profit. And brand contribution, they call role of brand. But it's a brand contribution which really differentiates us.
And our methodology of calculating brand contribution is significantly better than Interbrand's?
It is significantly better.
So let's look at in what way. So what is it that makes up the BrandZ brand contribution aspects?
Okay, the key differentiator is that we are actually talking to the consumer, which is something Interbrand is not doing. We cover 10,000 brands, we go across 30 different countries, 30 plus countries, and we have a database that goes back to 1998 with 2 million consumer opinions in that. And this is something Interbrand does not have.
So what's the benefit of that in a sense, and in a sense, how does Interbrand go about creating their brand value and the difference between the two?
Yeah, so Interbrand, they used one of 3 methods when they're assessing the brand value. The first is an expert panel, and I think everyone will agree expert panels can be very biased and very subjective. The second is looking at the historical role of the brand contribution or their role of brand for other brands within the same category, and then applying those learnings to a specific brand that they're valuing, which obviously is flawed in its approach. And the third is doing primary research. We don't know the depth of primary research that they do, but what we do know is that we are 100% certain that we do more.
Now, there's also an exclusion. Interbrand excludes certain categories and certain brands in the pool of brands that they value.
They do. To be considered in their top 100, you have to have certain geographical criteria met, and you also have to be in a category that they're considering. So if we first look at the geographical, where you have to be on 3 continents, you have to have 30% of your revenues outside your home market, and you have to have a substantial presence in emerging markets. If you're looking at the category side, you'll notice in their T100, for example, they have no telecom brands. That's because they don't consider the telecom category for the T100.
So effectively, Interbrand are excluding a huge number of big, valuable global brands.
Yes, they are. What's quite interesting is they're excluding about 50% or 52% of the big brands. And in their attempt to become global by putting these geographical constraints in, they're actually doing the exact opposite.
Now, what does that mean, though, in terms of valuation?
Okay, in terms of valuation, why BrandZ is the superior method is, number one, we capture all the brands, regardless of their geographical print and regardless of their categories. They're leaving 50% out. And number two, we capture the power of the brand, which they don't. And they don't do that because they are not capturing the brand contribution correctly. And what we're seeing is that is actually reflecting very well when you look at the share prices of our portfolios. Our strong brands have grown 58% since 2006 versus 39% for Interbrand and 23% for the S&P.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Robin. I managed to catch up with the Chief Executive of WPP, Sir Martin Sorrell, and we had a far-ranging conversation around brands, but I started by asking him about his analysis of the global economy. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Martin. Clearly, global brands don't operate in a vacuum. What's your perspective of the outlook for the global economy?
2010 there was a sharp recovery. 2011 was a record year for us, and 2012 has been a record year as well. And I think that reflects what we saw from a client point of view, a recovery, as I say, in 10 and 11 from a sharp downturn post-Lehman in 2009. 2012 again a reasonable year, and 2013 I think will be reasonable again. We'll see worldwide GDP growth in real terms of about 3%, including inflation about 5%. Jeremy Bullmore has said for many, many years there's a finite limit to what you can do on cost, but at least until you get to 100% market share, it's infinite to what you can do on the top line. And real growth and sustained growth only comes by growing the top line, what retailers would call like-for-like store growth.
Martin, you see chief executives and chairmen of multinational companies very regularly. Are you finding that those chief executives have the brand much more on their agenda than they have done in the past, and recognise that it's important to growing shareholder value?
I used to make the joke that that Harvard Business School had finally discovered, this was in the early part of the new millennium, that all business policy was marketing strategy. And I think CEOs should be the brand guardians of their companies. The most successful CEOs are all people that have made the brand front and center part of their strategy. So strong CEOs with strong visions and strong CMOs who share that vision and implement them, that's absolutely critical, I think, to success. What we are also seeing is that these enlightened CEOs, these brand guardian CEOs, see the integration of their advertising and marketing services as being absolutely critical.
And why do you think it's important to create a list of most valuable global brands, and the extent to which you think that the BrandZ methodology is superior to most?
I think pointing out the value of brands, trying to provide some financial flesh to the brand skeleton, if I can put it that way, or some financial justification is critically important. I think giving our clients a precise financial justification for making the investments is not a cost. This is an investment they make. And again, as Jeremy has pointed out, you continuously need to refresh that investment in the brand. That's absolutely critical. So showing clients how brands are valued, how changes in that value occur over time, I think is critically important. As far as methodology is concerned, I think the Millward Brown methodology, which is the fundamental basis for the BrandZ methodology, is superior to all others. Strong brands work. They work from a total shareholder return point of view, from a stock market point of view. So this is where Madison Avenue and Wall Street comes together.
We're going through a sort of a changing world, geopolitically, economically and technology-wise. What advice would you give brands as to how they should grow their brand value in this environment?
I think focusing on the top line, focusing on brands is critically important. And there are two dimensions that I think are important in that context. One is capitalize on the geographical opportunities. The other part of it is being prepared to make changes because of the technology, experimenting with all the new media.
How important is the Total BrandZ project to WPP and the operating companies?
Well, we are about advertising and marketing services, about communication services. I think it's critically important for WPP to be seen, and its constituent companies to be seen, as the people that understand brands. So BrandZ is very much at the heart of what WPP does in all its geographical and functional iterations, with all its tribes and operating companies. So it's critical. It's the lifeblood. Brands are the lifeblood of our business, and showing that we understand how they're valued, or how they should be valued, and how those changes in values have taken place and can take place is critically important.
Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
David.
Much appreciated.
Thank you. Good.
Well, now we start to come to that point in this webcast where we're looking at the data for 2013, the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands. I'm now joined by Nick Cooper, who is the Managing Director of Millward Brown Optimal. Nick, what's the headlines?
Thank you, David. Well, this year we've seen an uplift in total brand value for the top 100 of 7%. Whereas last year it was only marginally ahead, we've now seen a really big surge, which means that since the recession started, and my goodness, that's 5 years ago, the value of the most valuable brands has gone up by 32%. And since we started the rankings in 2006, they've gone up by 77%. And it's critical to note that in every year they have grown.
And even in the depths of the recession, we saw brand value grow as well, didn't we?
Exactly, because even in a recession, consumers still value brands, they still go and buy brands, and that is reflected in our rankings.
So Nick, that's the headline. When you delve underneath it, what do we start to see?
Okay, well, the first thing is that we've seen growth across all categories except for technology, where there's been a year of stability, and for oil and gas, which continues to have a hard time of things, particularly financially. But even in Europe, we see that the top brands have managed to continue to grow. We've seen a bounce back in the US economy in particular, and we've also seen continued growth in Asia, and all of that has powered growth this year. The second thing is that, most notably, as a sector, the financial institutions are finally back, that decisively they're making a great deal more money than they were, and that's even extended to not only banks but also insurance. We also see that whilst technology has been flat, that technology remains a huge force, huge number of brands, all with huge value, and that continues to have an impact on the total value of the top 100. We also see that really there's been a big growth again in luxury. Luxury has surged ahead, but also in terms of value brands. So at the top and the bottom of the value chain, as it were, we've seen a lot of growth. We've also seen that while global brands have grown very fast, we also see that regional brands have grown also very decisively in some of the categories.
Okay, let's take a little bit more of a deep dive into those categories themselves.
Okay, well, in terms of growth of each category, as we see that the biggest change and the biggest upward movement is actually in beer, which
that's always nice to see.
Well, that's right, particularly post-recession. Well, perhaps we really are out of the recession if everyone's drinking beer, and that's partly a result of really rapid consolidation within the industry. As I said before, we've seen a real bounce back in banks. In particular, the global banks have grown very fast, but we also see some growth in regional banks. We also even see growth in insurance, which has had a very hard time of it. But we see growth across the piece, and in particular, big categories like telecoms and cars and banking have grown, and that's had a big effect. So when we look at where categories are from pre-recession, so we go back 5 years, we see that in fact every single category has bounced back with the sole exception of cars. So again, when you look at the growth over the last few years, we see that all those categories, which contain all the biggest brands in the world, are well ahead of where they were when the recession started.
Well, Nick, in a few moments we'll be counting down the top 100 most valuable global brands for 2013, but for the moment, thank you very much indeed. I had a conversation and caught up with Jans Welter, who is the Managing Director of Credit Suisse, one of the leading M&A banks of the world, to get his perspective about how important and valuable brands are. Well, I'm here with Jans Welter, who is the Managing Director and the Global Head of Consumer and Retail for Credit Suisse. Jans, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We at WPP, 170,000 people around the globe every day spending their time building brands. From a financial perspective, from an investment banker's perspective, is there a great value in brands? And when you look at a deal, how important is the brand from a strategic perspective?
David, I think the brand probably ranks as the number one, maybe the number two most important thing that strategic investors will be looking at in a transaction. At the end of the day, the two things that will weigh the most for a CEO that is looking at an acquisition is the attractiveness of the brand and the attractiveness of the category that he's buying into. The category itself has to be attractive, it has to have the necessary long-term growth rate, and it needs to show the ability to grow within that category through innovation, through marketing.
Presumably, in a company where you're acquiring a brand that goes into a portfolio of other businesses they might have, the strategic fit that brand has with the other brands within that portfolio.
The work that is being done in terms of the large consumer products company mining country by country to understand which are the right attributes of a brand is ultimately the blueprint of what a corporate development department is looking at to be able to then acquire and say, is there any way of acquiring these brands to be able to achieve that sort of portfolio of brands that a company is looking for?
So I suppose here's where the sort of rubber meets the road in a sense. So when you're pricing a deal, when you're looking about whether you're buying or whether you're selling, are stronger brands priced at a heavier premium than weaker brands?
Yes, they are. There's clearly a premium, a significant premium for strong brands. We wouldn't actually value the brand discretely and then we value the fixed assets of the business, but we'd look at an overall cash flow of the business. And it's in terms of those cash flows that you would very much see the cash flow return on investment being significantly better for a business that has strong brands. An acquirer will want to ensure that the necessary investment in advertisement, in promotion, in marketing has been there to sustain that brand equity.
And that is something that you actively look at, which is how much has been invested in the past, and that's a way of seeing whether actually that brand has been sufficiently nurtured to be able to sustain those cash flows going forward.
Correctly. There can be times where you could probably underinvest, as we would call it, in a brand, but that does catch up over time. I think the second element is really the reason that strong brands deserve a premium valuation. Think of a brand like Coca-Cola, is the ability to be able to charge premium prices with a underlying invested capital that is significantly less than if a company wouldn't have those types of brands.
And the flip side of that, presumably in certain deals, there's huge value that can be unlocked in regenerating a dormant brand.
There are certain categories where we will find buyers that are particularly good at finding brands that are somewhat dusty, that have a certain value. Either historically they've represented a value and have been unloved, that once they're divested and they're being provided with some love, some investment, some innovation, actually can be reinvigorated.
So looking slightly to the future, do you think that the brand is going to become a more important consideration or a less important consideration in M&A going forward?
I do think that there is, in many of the large FMCG categories, there's been a lot of consolidation. So the scarcity value with regards to brands coming up for sale means that there is a lot more interest in iconic brands that are available, just because there's a lot less that comes to market these days. So I do think that where brands have those specifications, we are seeing a expansion of multiples that are being paid for those brands. And that is also coupled with a lot of the FMCG companies having become much better at integrating brands like that and generating the synergies, i.e. making the returns work at even higher multiples than what we've seen before.
Now, it's been a pretty tumultuous time for corporations' M&A activity the last 5 years. Martin Sorrell talks about we're in this sort of corrugated bottom in terms of the economic cycle at the moment. Again, looking forward, do you see an increase in M&A activity over the next few years?
We've noticed a steady increase over the last couple of quarters. There's a lot of signs with regards to the consumer environment stabilizing in a number of Northern European countries. The consumer environment has been strong for the last 12 months. We see somewhat weakening in emerging markets. Having said that, the financing markets are so strong that it is very difficult to actually look at an acquisition and not make the numbers work.
And you can't help but look east at the moment. A lot of Chinese companies now have very strong balance sheets. We see interest from Chinese companies of interesting brands around the world. Do you see a big sea change of Chinese companies and companies from emerging markets making acquisitions of quality brands around the world?
We do see a lot of interest by Chinese organizations that are looking at brands that would otherwise take decades to build up, brands that have certain heritage. At the end of the day, those brands have to work in China. It is rare that we see situations where a Chinese buyer would buy a brand that only works in the domestic market but doesn't work in the home market for them. And that by definition means that there's certain categories where there's more interest than other categories.
Great. Well, Jens, thank you very much indeed for joining us and being with us. It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, clearly growing strong, valuable brands is going to become significantly more important rather than less important across a number of dimensions over the years to come. Well, now it's the time to reveal the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2013.
Make it ooze with the unthinkable. Don't stop till you come first. Life's so unpredictable. Take control of what you're worth. Wasting time's forgivable, but nobody wants to grow old. It's time for the original to come and break the mold. Take it easy, just one step at a time, and baby, you'll be fine. Take a race, don't hold back. Get yourself back on track. Keep on moving, don't stop. Don't stop, don't stop. Let your senses guide you. Shake it up, inspire you. Do anything you want to, but don't stop, don't stop. Remember how you made it here, a game of truth or dare. You rolled the dice with confidence, now the fortunes we can share. The finish line is drawing near, just keep your eye on the prize. A new style is calling you, why don't you try it on the sides? Take it easy, just one step at a time, and baby, you'll be fine. Take a race, don't hold back. Get yourself back on track. Keep on moving, don't stop. Don't stop, don't stop. Let your senses guide you. Shake it up, inspire you. Do anything you want to, but don't stop, don't stop. A crowd of hungry animals are eager to sneak in. If you can find that leap of faith, then let the games begin. Awaken to a paradise, I'll smile at your every command. Remember to take the good advice and you'll avoid that sinking sand. Take it easy, just one step at a time, and baby, you'll be fine. Take a race, don't hold back. Get yourself back on track. Keep on moving, don't stop. Don't stop, don't stop. Let your senses guide you. Shake it up, inspire you. Do anything you want to, but don't stop, don't stop. Take a race, don't hold back. Get yourself back on track. Keep on moving, don't stop. Don't stop, don't stop. Take a race, don't hold back. Get yourself back on track. Keep on moving, don't stop. Don't stop, don't stop. Let your senses guide you. Shake it up, inspire you. Do anything you want to, but don't stop, don't stop.
Wow, so that's the top 100, and to delve into some of the details that lie behind the rankings. I'm now joined by Elsbeth Chang, who is the head of brand rankings at Millwall Brown Optimal. Elsbeth.
Hello, David.
Nice to see you. Okay, so let's take a look in detail of those 100 brands and some of the brands that are in the sector rankings as well. First of all, let's start at the top risers.
The top risers, yeah, why not? We have now the list of top 20 risers in the 2013 ranking. And we are going to look at some of these brands in details. But let's look at Prada, who is our top riser this year. So Prada, 63% growth, which is partly fueled by Asia, but not just Asia, but also Asian tourists in Europe. And the other thing, as a luxury brand, they have been investing a lot in improving consumer brand experience. They have improved their digital content. They have built a lot more flagship stores around the world. And they have also improved their product offering. They are very strong in soft leather goods, which are very popular in the market now.
Okay, what else is interesting? I mean, I noticed that we have brands like Tencent and Samsung in that top rising list. Interesting technology brands from Asia as well.
That's right. These two technology brands, we're going to study them in detail, a bit more details later in the category ranking. But what they have done well in comparison to other brands is that even though the technology category is quite flat this year, they have been doing different things in order to keep the ball rolling.
And we've also seen brands like Home Depot who really struggled in the depth of the recession, now beginning to, having invested huge amounts in both their stores and their brands, seeing increase in their brand valuations. Okay, let's take a look at the banks. And as we heard earlier from Nick, banks have really done well this year.
That's right. And before we start talking about bank, let's look at what do we see as global bank, because this is the category that we're going to look at. In order to be qualified as global bank, more than 40% of your revenue has to be generated outside your home market. And for this lead table that we're looking at, we see that the category is up 23% year on year. And the top player this year is HSBC with a brand value of almost 24 billion. And remember HSBC, the strategy is now the world's leading international bank, and they're doing very well to achieve this goal.
So let's take a look at the soft drinks category. What do we see there?
As we see, we have redefined the category as well to show a share of throat concept. And we're redefining this category to better understand the competitive landscape in the soft drinks market. And we're expanding to include all the non-alcoholic drinks. And what we see, if we have a look at the newcomers, we have 2 coffees, Nescafe, Nespresso, 2 juices, Tropicana and Minute Maid, and we have 1 tea, Nestea, who comes at number 15. And that also agrees with the trend that people are becoming more concerned about their health.
Okay, so technology.
That's right.
What's the technology story?
Technology is very interesting. We've been saying that this year we don't see a lot of innovation in technology. What we see though is a lot of refinement. And what we mean by refinement is not only product, but also the way how they improve their brand. Let's look at the top 10 technology brands. Most of them are still dominated by the American players, but we see 2 shining stars from Asia. The first one is number 6, Tencent. They are now the most valuable technology brand in China, but also they are now the largest non-state-owned enterprise brand in China. And app chat, WeChat, is now the largest in the world with 350 million users. And if we see the other player, Samsung, they're now number 7 in our technology category, and they are up by 51%.
And we have historically, over the last 4 or 5 years, seen tremendous brand growth from Apple, and this year their brand value change is just 1%.
That's right. We see that, as we can see from other players, the ones who have risen a lot in brand value, they have been doing a lot more in terms of product refinement or in terms of brand building. And Apple this year, I think we'll have to wait and see what they're going to bring to the market, any new things, innovations or refinement. But at the moment, it's still in a very steady mode, and we are waiting to see what's going to happen next to them.
Well, Elspeth, thank you very much indeed. Now we're going to take a look at some of the overriding themes that cut across all of the rankings. So, Peter, what are the key themes?
Well, there's one overarching characteristic that these brands have got. By one, I mean three: meaningful, different, and salient. But the one characteristic means, therefore, power. Brands that are more attractive to their consumers and they offer them exactly what they want are meaningful. Obviously, different is something that really commands that extra bit of price, and saliency is the one that you really think of. And when you combine those, look at the top 100 brands and see how they score on those metrics, you can absolutely see that they score so highly that they're more likely to drive higher volume sales, many brands commanding an actual premium, others commanding more than their competitors do. And the other key thing is, of course, that they're then setting themselves up for the future, for sustainable growth. And indeed, as you can see on the screen, these top 100 brands compared to an average for all brands of 100, they score massively powerfully, meaningful, different, and salient on huge index numbers.
And when that happens, do you see a step change in the brand's performance?
You do indeed. In fact, if you go back over the last 8 years, because brands really, we shouldn't think of them as short-term investments. They are sustainable, wonderful investments over quite a long period.
Indeed, as Jens said earlier, the importance he ascribes to consistently investing in brands over a number of years.
And you absolutely see that within our BrandZ database, and also that reflects itself in the values here. You can see over the last 8 years, the 8 top risers, and you can see some stunning massive growth, more than 400% amongst those 8, compared to the pretty impressive 77% for the top 100 as a whole. But right at the top of the list, might surprise people, it's not Apple. Apple, fantastic growth, over 1,000%, but it's Subway, which has, hardly stealthily, it's just conquered the world with loads and loads of outlets and a very, very strong brand promise and delivery.
Gus, I think it has more outlets than any other brand in the world, really, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I sort of like Subways, and I easy to find them, which is really good, which is lucky. And the key thing is that those brands, of course, have some common reasons, and we've looked across the data behind the top 100, and we see 8 successful trends. The main one, particularly for Subway, and my wallet is very important to me, so it's a great value proposition. But that doesn't mean just price. If you look at the other brands there, another very good example of that would be Hermes. So it's not about the actual price, it's about what you get as a bargain in return for what you're buying for. And these brands across the top 100 generally offer a very good value proposition. Some of the other things I think you can see is clearly we've been talking about that in terms of the technology category being very relevant for today. And of course, the other brands in the top 100, which aren't necessarily technology brands, are using those techniques and that technology to make themselves relevant, refreshed for today. And obviously expanding your offering, making sure that your footprint is in the right fast-growing markets is another way to growth. But while you're doing that, of course, you have to maintain a very good reputation. More on reputation a little bit later. And so these brands are meaningful, different, as I've just said. The other key characteristic we see about them is that they have a brand personality, if you like, that is definitive. They're not just dull everything to everybody. And brands shouldn't really worry about being really interesting to some people and not for others. Actually, that's quite a good characteristic, so you're well defined. And overall, of course, what you can't resist having if you're going to be a success is a fantastic branded experience. You're only as good as your last experience.
Well, Peter, there are a number of brands that are in the 2013 rankings that weren't in last year's rankings, and a lot of those have harnessed the lessons of those 8 key success trends. The sharp-eyed of you may well have noticed those brands in the countdown, but let's take a closer look at the newcomers for 2013. Well, Robin, we've spoken quite a lot about the differences we've seen in regions. Let's take a deep dive at the brand valuation numbers across the regions.
Asia is growing by 13%, but Latin America, on the other hand, is actually declining by 13%. At the same time, we're seeing moderate growth in Europe and the US.
Okay, so let's get under the skin of Asia. Looking at the top 10 brands in Asia, what do we see?
Okay, well, basically it's a China story. 6 out of the 10 top brands in Asia are from China. You've seen China Mobile already on the top 100. It was placed number 10. It was the only non-American brand to be able to achieve that top 10 space. Looking at Tencent, it grew 52% over the last year. And that was driven mostly from its internet businesses. So about 3/4 of their business comes from online media, social media, games. Where they see the growth coming in the future is in mobile, and that's where they're putting their investment. And then finally, Samsung, let's talk about. Samsung is our Korean brand, and they're really taking the world by storm with their Galaxy phone, and actually are outspending Apple in the US and seeing great results.
Well, from Asia to LATAM, we see a 13%, but a slightly different number in front of it.
Exactly. So we're seeing Latin America is down 13%. However, surprisingly, what's really bucking the trend is beer. So you'll notice that there's 3 beers featuring in our top 10 list. And that's really a result of the economic decline, where people are shifting from going out to actually coming and socializing within their own homes. Also interesting on here is oil and gas. Petrobras in Brazil it has lost 45% of its brand value, and that's largely due to government intervention.
Now, the LATAM story is not just fast-growing Latin American brands. The fast-growing markets also comprise of other countries as well. What do we see there when we look at those fast-growing markets?
Yeah, so we see four brands in Russia, we see 2 in India, and we see 1 in Africa. In fact, we have a new entrant, which is Lukoil in Russia.
Let's take a look at North America.
Okay, so North America is up marginally at 2%. Here, it's very much a tech and telecom story. So 6 out of the 10 top brands on this list are tech and telecom brands. Apple is, as you know, number one in the top 100 as well. And just to give you an idea of the magnitude of Apple's size, it is 60%, its brand value is 60% greater than that of Google. And if you were to take the brand value of Coca-Cola, add that to Google, then you would get the brand value of Apple.
Well, at least closer to our home, let's take a look at the UK. And we've got a new entrant in the UK.
Yes, David, we do. We have BT that's coming in to the top 10 UK ranking. And BT's really made a lot of investments in their infrastructure and their fiber. They're also investing for the future. So in terms of 4G, and they see that to be a very big area of growth. Another thing that they've really benefited from was the sponsorship of the Olympics, which of course is televised globally. Now we see other players also benefiting from sponsorship of the Olympics last year. For example, BP, they really made a strong investment, and we can see that growth coming through.
Great, Robin. Thank you very much indeed. Now, WPP companies have offices right the way around the world and brand experts right the way across the world, including the fast-growing markets. And we got together a number of those experts to understand a little more about what's going on in fast-growing markets. Well, in order to get some context behind some of the numbers that we've seen on the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2013 in the BRICS and the fast-growing markets, we've got together some of our colleagues. First of all, we have Mag Wong, who is the non-executive chairman of Added Value in China. We have Fabian Hernandez, who's the chief executive of Millward Brown in Latin America. And we have Alison Deeb, who is the chief executive officer of Metropolitan Republic in South Africa, together with Paul Warner, also from Metropolitan Republic, who is the executive creative strategist. Well, let's start with one of the very high level analysis that we've just seen, which is if you look at the difference between the growth in China, around 30% brand value growth of our China top 100 brands that are in there, versus what we see in Latin America, a decline of about 13%. I wonder if you can give us a little bit of context, Fabian, about why we're seeing brand decline values in Latin America, in particular in Brazil. Not so long ago, Brazil really was the hot market. What's gone on this year?
The financial factor, I think, is crucial this year. On the one hand, we have a devaluation of the Brazilian real, the local currency. We also had last year that the Brazilian government was trying to incentivize the economy, and for instance, they requested banks to lower their interest rates, and that had a deep financial impact on the banks. And as you can see, the Brazilian banks had their valuations coming down significantly.
Are we seeing more Brazilian companies and Latin American companies understanding that brand is an important asset to invest in?
Oh yes, I think the brand component is gaining some traction, at least with some of the markets. You can see in the BrandZ ranking that Natura, a cosmetic company, gained value substantially. And that's mainly driven by the brand factor.
Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and in this case, a 13% increase in the brand value of Chinese brands, although the number of brands in the ranking has declined ever so slightly. Mag, what's going on in China at the moment, and why are brands being heavily advantaged?
China's economy is still growing very well, so we are talking about 7.3% GDP growth in the last quarter, and then people are disappointed compared to a 0.3% growth in London, and then people are relieved. So you can see the perspective. China's economy is still doing very well, and companies are very keen to invest. And they, as you said, the companies are really interested, and they are putting in their effort in building brands, and they realize it is an asset for the company. And then domestically, consumption is fueled by the government. Market is encouraging people to spend, and then the savings mentality of people have changed to a spending mentality due to different reasons. And also on the macro status, the companies are encouraged by the Chinese government to grow overseas, and that is also reflected in the brand value. Chinese population, it's one who believe in brand, and it's a population who embrace brand values.
MTN was the very first African brand to enter the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands. It did that last year. And this year, MTN has performed exceptionally well. It's gone up 23% in value and 9 places up the ranking. Paul, what is it about MTN that's bound itself so tightly with consumers in Africa?
The proliferation of the ability to access imagery. I know the rest of the world sees that as a bit odd to go, but what do you mean? That's been around forever. When you have a mobile platform that has introduced voice, and then within a year or two has introduced video, the impact of what that does on a young individual's mind is absolutely immense. And when you're looking at the African continent that's sitting at 65 to 70% of the human race that sits on the continent is under the age of 20, you start to realize what a brand can actually do, because a brand is not a company. It is a change of life. It opens businesses, it lifts people's education up, it allows medical services.
Alison, what is it though that binds MTN as a brand closer to its customers that's just above the enabling technology?
Despite the fact that we are in 20 countries, it's about the fact that we see each country as the only country. Whether we are in South Africa and we divide South Africa up and go and do a campaign, we'll run 100 different radio spots because we should, because they're different. There are 100 different reasons to talk to people differently. So we are not a mobile company. We're not a telco company. We're a lifestyle brand today. We are integral to your life and to your state of being and your pride. And I guess that has really resonated tonally and actually in the hearts and minds of our almost 200 million customers.
We've seen tremendous growth in fast-growing markets over the last few years in terms of their domestic brands. Do you see strong international brands being created by fast-growing markets over the course of the next few years?
Well, I believe that in Brazil there are big local brands that could go international or worldwide. In other Latin countries, I don't think we have the ability to build that kind of brands.
In the case of China, I think the domestic brands have this ambition, but they know of the challenges.
Expansion into Africa is everywhere. It is spoken about every day by every decent company that thinks ahead. It is now everywhere. And we are determined to really make a change in terms of how we take brands to those very interesting, very young, very impressionable consumers that exist out there in the millions. So we're very excited to be part of this journey that is very alive today.
Both South Africa and China have recently hosted significant world sporting events, and Brazil is about to host both of them, the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup. These sports events sort of come and go, but what lasting impact do they leave for their host country's brand?
The Olympics has certainly made the Chinese people think and feel and see that the country is now open to the world. it did stimulate a lot of nationalistic pride at that point in time. So the China brand, people feel, has gone out to connect to the world.
The power of uniting a nation to host the world, there is no other opportunity to do that. So that has changed us fundamentally, and I believe forever.
So how's the World Cup being positioned in Brazil, Fabienne, and what are the opportunities for brands?
The Brazilian government somehow wants to involve neighboring countries so that the World Cup is a South American event, not just a Brazilian one. The opportunity for brands, for sponsoring brands, is huge, just because of the importance of football in Brazil. So far we have seen the usual sponsors, but the Brazilian government is involving big national brands like the retailer Pão de Açúcar and some of the cosmetics companies, banks and so forth, the largest Brazilian brands.
Alison Deeb, I wonder what light that you can throw on what the opportunities have been for brands during the World Cup and how potentially brands in Brazil could benefit from some of the activities that took place in South Africa a few years ago.
One of the things that still astonish us today is that MTN, as a client of ours and as a brand that was a number 2 in the market, had an incredible response through the efforts of the World Cup. It outspent and in fact outscored a brand such as Coca-Cola, which is normally unheard of.
For Brazil, a word of advice: there's 2 clients, 2 brands. Those brands who are not going to be a sponsor and those that are. A piece of advice for those that are going to, and why something that we found worked really well was to create a distinct customer experience around the World Cup. People aligned themselves to the local in-country brand that was sponsoring it out of pride, and having a unique experience that surrounded that really worked really well.
So, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. I'd just like to thank Paul, Alison, Fabienne and Mag very much indeed. Thanks very much for being with us. Well, as Paul Warner said, there are 2 types of brands that can take advantage of sporting events. There's the brands that sponsor it and the brands who can be particularly clever in the way in which they position themselves around the event. Let's take a look at one brand that did that sensationally well at the London 2012 Olympics. That brand was Tencent, one of our fastest riser brands, and maybe this was part of the reason. Well, we're here in Romford, Essex. It's 1 a.m. in the morning, and the building that I'm standing in front of, up until a few weeks ago, used to be a disused youth club. Well, it's been radically transformed and is now the headquarters of one of China's leading brands and internet companies. This is the London 2012 headquarters and broadcasting studio of Tencent. So let's take a look inside and see how Tencent is using this building to help build the Tencent brand. As in about half an hour, the studio will start live broadcasting as millions of Chinese wake up to hear the latest news of what happened at London 2012. So we're in the studio. This is the main part where all the action takes place, and the studio is divided into 2 halves. The first half over here is where the Olympic gold athletes will come and be interviewed, and over the course of the Olympic period, there have been almost 40 different gold medal winners who've taken part in live programming here. And the team over here are in the middle of putting together tonight's live program, which will go out at about 1:30 UK time, early morning in China. The second part of the studio is towards the back, and this is called the Tea House. And the Tea House is where the families of Olympic medal winners will come to be interviewed and will share some very emotional moments with their children. So I'm now walking into the control room of what is the nerve centre of the Tencent production here in the Romford studio. And as you can see around me, it's full of technical gear which enables the entire crew to feed the live broadcast from the studio directly out to the internet, so that the more than 400 million Chinese viewers can watch this programming live. And so from this temporary studio here in Essex, Tencent are doing something that fits the brand really well. They're the interconnecting social networking glue that's communicating what's happening here in London to millions of people in China. And they're also doing something that the Chinese consumer is expecting from Tencent: constant innovation, in a way that also allows the Chinese consumers to get a sense of what these amazing athletes have achieved here in London and the interconnection with them and their families. Creating all of this takes vision and money, and plenty of it. This doesn't come cheap, but it's a reflection of how important social networking, the internet, is now to the fabric of Chinese society. Tencent's innovation and the way in which they're using their brand to establish a deeper bond with the consumers is being highlighted and magnified by the program they put on here for the 2012 Games. We should expect more of this type of innovation from Tencent in the future, and I, for one, can't wait to see what they'll be doing for Rio. It's not just the battle for medals that's taking place here in London 2012. With billions of people right across the globe watching their country go for gold, there's a parallel competition going on, the one for brands and marketeers. And that competition is every bit as competitive. It's 4 years since Li Ning audaciously lit the Beijing Olympics alight, and where brand China was exposed to the world. Chinese brands are using this canvas of London and the most watched event in the planet in the competition for growing their strong domestic brands into strong international brands and even global brands. And it's not just Chinese athletes that Chinese brands are sponsoring. If you thought you'd seen a rather unusual logo on the kit of the American diving team, well, you'd be right. That's Li Ning. And if the company's ambitions are anything to go by, that logo won't be unfamiliar for much longer. So we took to the streets of London to find out just how aware consumers from around the world are of Chinese brands. And we started at the most famous retail street of them all, London's Oxford Street. Well, take a look at the brand logos that are on this board. And tell me, are there any logos here that you recognise?
Yeah, the 361 degrees.
And what's 361?
I think it's a sports brand.
No, I don't.
At the moment, no.
No, I don't think I recognize any of them.
No.
No. No.
It's a beer, right?
Lenovo. I know Lenovo. Lenovo is computer people.
That is a big fat no from me.
No, none at all.
Would you be surprised to know that these are the 50 most important and valuable brands in China?
Probably not, no. I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of Chinese companies that we haven't heard of and aren't aware of, and yet are huge, that aren't really, brand names over here.
But unlike the ease within which certain Chinese athletes appeared to win gold in London 2012, creating and developing international Chinese brands is going to be considerably more challenging across a whole series of dimensions. We've already seen the decline in Latin American brand values, pretty much led by Brazil, but there's been one Brazilian brand that has systematically, over the last few years, performed exceptionally well in the category rankings. Let's take a look at who that brand is. It was 1969 when Luiz Zebra opened his small laboratory, an even smaller store in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Little did he know where this would lead, but I'm sure on opening day he didn't envisage that this lab would give birth to Brazil's leading brand of cosmetics, perfumes and personal care products. And that's quite a market to lead, as Brazil is this category's third largest in the world. The company that he founded was Natura, which today has over 100 million customers. Luiz didn't last long in his Sao Paulo store, or stores at all, as it was soon after that Natura adopted a very different sales model. Shunning physical stores, franchises and concessions, the established route to market for this sector, Natura opted instead for a direct sales model. Today, Natura has more than 1.5 million sales agents, or consultants as they prefer to call them. These consultants are mainly women who have received a huge amount of training in selling the ranges, but more importantly, and what really differentiates the people and the business model, is a thorough understanding of the brand, its positioning, an essence, and how best to communicate it. And according to Kantar, Natura has a penetration of Brazilian households of an impressive 61%. Since its very modest beginnings, Natura has never strayed away from its fundamental passions and what it sees as its reason for being: to conceive and sell products and services that create a harmonious relationship with a person and their body, and with nature as a whole. Natura embraces the philosophy and core attributes of developing a strong, valuable brand, being consistent and differentiated. Consistency is the essence of strong brands. Over the past 44 years, Natura has always focused on being an eco-friendly, sustainable company, long before this was fashionable or recognised as essential for the survival of our planet. Natura uses natural ingredients, shunning animal testing. They use ordinary, Brazilian-looking women in their ads and communications, and not supermodels. Under the Natura brand umbrella, they also have a stable of very strong sub-brands, each with their own identity, such as Eco and Una. There's a powerful brand message that cuts right across the portfolio: sustainability, Brazilian, natural and pleasure. Natura now is not just for women. It's diversified and anticipated consumer trends and has a large portfolio of products for men, children and even babies. And it's not just consumers that like the brand. Whilst the stock market increased 7% in 2012, Natura's stock increased around 68% over the same period. Natura has a very strong value proposition and 3 dimensions that it plays on: economic, social, environmental, and its contribution to society. Natura clearly has international aspirations. Now a publicly traded company, one of the key reasons for the initial IPO was to raise money to internationalize the brand. At the moment, it's mostly in Latin America, a big market opportunity on its own. Its international revenue has grown over 3.5 times over the last 5 years and now accounts for more than 11% of revenue. Recognizing the centrality of technology to business and brand performance, Natura has also harnessed technology to be a key driver of the business. Both consumer-facing, through the use of digital and social technologies, but also, importantly, in infrastructure, to improve the service to their fast-growing millions of customers and consultants. From a lab and a shop to Brazil's 6th most valuable brand, and the BrandZ personal care category's number 9, up 12% this year, and the only non-American or European brand in this category ranking, and with the highest brand contribution. Natura, a name we'll all be hearing a lot more from. Well, I'm back with Nick Cooper, clearly a man who uses many Natura products by the looks of things. Nick, let's now take a sort of a helicopter view and look at some of the key sort of takeaways that we see from the analysis of the top 100.
Certainly. Well, there are obviously a lot of lessons that we can learn from BrandZ, but we've focused on 4 that we think are particularly important. The first one is purpose. We talk a lot now about brand purpose, but what is the brand for? What does it stand for? Why does it make itself meaningful and different for consumers? And when we look at brands which have real purpose and create that emotive connection with consumers, we see consistently they grow faster than their competitors. One of my favorite examples is Pampers. It's a very mundane category, but the connection between the mother and the mother role and the use of the product and the baby is incredibly strong, and we've seen Pampers grow year after year after year and outstrip its competitors. That's a great example. So that's purpose. The second thing is consumers. Every brand needs consumers, of course, but we've seen some key things happening with consumers. In particular, they want greater and greater value. Peter talked about value earlier. We've seen, particularly in categories like soft drinks and personal care, we've seen what some people call and marketing. So it's the product and something else. So it's a soft drink and vitamins. It's a multi-purpose or multifunctional kind of personal care. And those sort of things are not only making sure that great brands are keeping pace and maintaining relevance with consumers, but they're also constantly upgrading the value offer and the value proposition that consumers get. And that's another thing that marks out the successful brands that we've seen in this year's top 100. The third key takeaway is communication. Now, of course, we live in a world where integrated communications are more important than ever, where the opportunities for brands to communicate with consumers are multiplying all the time, particularly with the growth of social media. And we've seen category after category adopt an more integrated approach. But I think even more fascinatingly, brands are becoming their own medium. Brands are more than just a message. They are their own medium. We don't just mean those brands that have created new media, such as Facebook and Google. We actually mean other brands where we see many major consumer goods in soft drinks and other categories where they have the ability to communicate and to move huge numbers of people, to move audiences and to change the way they're thinking and behaving. And that's a new development. That simply wasn't possible a few years ago, and we've really seen that happening now. The fourth and the final one, what has characterised success is growth. That may seem a bit obvious, but there are two things that we see mark out successful brands. One is be where the growth is. That doesn't mean just the bricks, because there are also currents of growth, most notably in mature economies such as the US, but also in Europe. We see a great deal of success, such as retail. We see success in supposedly moribund markets, but actually you can create growth of that there out of the UK or Europe or the US just as you can in Asia. The second thing is innovation. We've seen in technology, Elspeth mentioned the fact that from the technology category point of view, it's been a sort of no-growth year because it's been not a year of innovation, but a year of refinement. And we see that those categories that have moved forward fastest are often those that have innovated, not only fastest, but innovated the best. So those are the four key takeaways that we particularly like to stress this year.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. And now let's take another holistic view of the cross-category trends that we've seen in 2013. Technology is a life force. Technology has become like breathing. We can't live without it, and we're not aware of it until there's a problem. In the technology category, devices, content and distribution systems have coalesced into parallel and competing ecosystems. New and shiny alone isn't enough. No one is unassailable. The winning brands attempt to be omnipresent and indispensable. Life is blended. We're increasingly moving seamlessly between our personal, social and business aspects of our lives, or we occupy these spaces simultaneously. Technology enables this fluidity. Brands must keep up as we move along the personal, social and business. Brands that force us to pause or switch devices risk losing us. Location is not important. Location is everywhere. Location doesn't matter anymore. You can reach the consumer anywhere that's convenient for them, both physically or virtually. Brands in all categories need to meet consumers wherever they are. Each space, physical or virtual, can serve a different and appropriate function. Consumers expect what they've paid for, and maybe a little bit more. Customers shop from a broad portfolio of brands. A woman might purchase an inexpensive dress, but then mix it with an expensive accessory. Consumers calibrate their expectations realistically. They're fine when the customer service of a value brand lacks intimate personal attention, but impatient if it lacks efficiency. Consumers don't expect everything from a brand, just what they've paid for, the brand promise and maybe a little bit more, like finding some luxury feel in a mass market setting. Consumers expect the experience that a brand promises to be executed flawlessly across categories. Having encountered excellent brand promises in some categories, consumers now apply these standards across all categories. They expect excellent brand experience and have little patience when it's missing, and they don't necessarily expect to pay extra for it. No category or channel is immune. No aspect of the brand is excluded. It's tough to deliver, but that's now the gold standard. Brands are becoming media. Brands are increasingly fulfilling the role once occupied by traditional media, creating content and organising it for relevant target audiences. That's because the brand's customer data is often more targeted and detailed. This phenomenon is most apparent in retail because retailers collect and organise an enormous volume of customer data that can be monetized. The role of reputation is rising. Trust is a precious and declining commodity. Brands are attempting to restore trust after it eroded in certain categories. Corporate reputation becomes more important as a way to confer credibility. After years of fracturing into sub-brands, some corporations are benefiting by promoting their brands under the corporate umbrella authority. Corporate reputation is especially important to fortify brands on areas like environmental responsibility and good citizenship. Presence in fast-growing markets is imperative for global brands. Even in a year of slowed economic expansion in the fast-growing markets, it's clear that brand presence here is no longer optional for some categories. There's a correlation between high brand value and presence in fast-growing markets. Presence doesn't assure high brand value, but absence makes high value much more difficult to achieve in more categories. The individual is the expert. Information is available everywhere to anyone, anytime. The brand-customer relationship and conversation is now amongst equals. Brands and customers learn from each other. Brands gain direction and co-creation possibilities, which binds themselves closer to their consumers. Well, Peter, one of the recurring themes that we've seen increasingly now is how important reputation is. It's not just reputation of the brand, it's the reputation of the company that makes the brand.
They are increasingly one and the same thing. And our data absolutely shows that. And we've specially put some new measures on BrandZ, and there are 8 key characteristics that are making up the reputation of the corporation as driven by the brand. And you can see that on all of them, compared to all brands as a whole, the top 100 score significantly better, except for charging fair prices. They don't score badly, but of course some of the brands are at an enormous premium. Overall, that means that their resulting reputation score is a really high one. And some good examples: MTN is particularly good in the responsibility type areas and employee areas. Apple, you would expect, would very much be leading the way. And trust is held very much by FedEx.
Well, we will be launching a new report all about reputation called RepZ very shortly, so keep an eye out for the announcement. Of course, BrandZ is not just about the brand rankings. It's the largest brand analytics database in the world, available exclusively to WPP companies. So let's take a look at what else is powered by BrandZ. As well as the definitive global brand valuations, BrandZ has also become the definitive brand valuation methodology and brand rankings for specific countries and their brands. The BrandZ Top 50 Most Valuable Chinese Brands is now in its third year. This annual ranking launched December in Beijing at a major WPP brand thought leadership event with clients, academics, media, and WPP colleagues from across the group. The data, analysis and insights are extensively reported in the Chinese and international press. January this year saw the first European launch of the BrandZ China rankings. Recognising the importance of China to the world's economies and the importance and authority of the BrandZ China brand rankings, this took place at the British Houses of Parliament. WPP, in conjunction with UK Trade and Investment and the All-Party Parliamentary Committee for Asia, hosted an event for British MPs, Lords, senior business leaders and clients. At the accompanying seminar, speakers included government ministers, leading China experts from WPP companies, academics and Chinese business leaders. And it's not just Asia that's having the BrandZ valuation focus. Last year saw the launch of the first BrandZ Top 50 Most Valuable Latin American Brands, covering Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and with a special in-depth focus on Brazil. Cross-company events took place simultaneously on launch day across 8 Latin American countries, involving thousands of clients, opinion formers, and the media. As the tectonic plates of the world's economies change, fast-growing markets are becoming more important to brand owners, and having well-informed insights increasingly valuable to clients and WPP colleagues across the world. All the extensive original material created for the country valuations are available to you, including videos explaining each of the top 50 most valuable Chinese brands, and highly informative reports on China and Latin America, covering not only the most valuable brands, but the context to the economies, consumer trends, and thought leadership pieces from across the region's WPP companies.
Well, we've almost come to the end of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2013 web seminar. All that remains for me to say is this is how you can get hold of all the material that we've talked about and that you've seen, plus a whole host more. All you need to do is go to this web address here, where you can download the full report together with the videos, infographics, plus a whole host of other material. You can also download on your mobile app for Android and iPhone a BrandZ app, which is available at www.brandz.com/mobile, and a special iPad magazine with unique content that can be obtained and downloaded from the iTunes store. All you need to do is to search for BrandZ. Well, I hope you enjoy that material, and especially the very comprehensive report that gives a full analysis of the numbers and the trends that we've discussed today. So, on behalf of everybody at WPP, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for watching. I'd like to thank everybody for participating and the people behind the scenes in production. From me, David Roth, thank you very much indeed.